When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine on February 24, 2022, President Vladimir Putin anticipated a swift and decisive victory. His special military operation was expected to last a mere 3 days, maybe a few weeks at most. The theory was simple. A decisive early strike would collapse the Ukrainian government, its military would surrender, and Russian flags would fly over Kyiv before NATO could even formulate a response. It was to be game, set, and match, yet 3.5 years later the reality could not be more different. Ukraine not only survived the initial onslaught, but has been systematically dismantling what was supposed to be the world's second most powerful military. The cost to Russia has been catastrophic, and the toll continues to mount. The story of this conflict is how Ukraine outmaneuvered and outplayed Putin at nearly every critical turn. Looking back at the invasion's start, Putin's plan was pulled straight from classic Russian military textbooks, a fact that ironically became Ukraine's greatest early advantage. Having spent decades as part of the Soviet Union, Ukrainian commanders possessed an intimate understanding of Russian operational doctrine. On the very first day of the invasion, they leveraged this knowledge to deliver a devastating blow to Russian ambitions. The Battle of Hostomel Airport was supposed to be a Russian triumph. The strategy was simple and elegant. Between 200 and 300 Russian paratroopers aboard 34 helicopters would swoop in to capture the airport, located just miles from Kyiv. This would create an air tunnel to funnel troops directly into the heart of the capital. It was the same playbook Russia had used successfully in Czechoslovakia in 1968, Afghanistan in 1979, and even Crimea in 2014. But Ukraine was ready. Instead of an empty airfield, Russian forces flew into a meticulously prepared kill zone. They were met with portable air defense systems, Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns, and a runway deliberately blocked with old vehicles and scrap aircraft. Ukraine's radar network, which happened to be the largest ground-based radar-guided air defense network in Europe, a legacy of its Soviet past, had been hardened against Russian electronic warfare through prior cooperation with NATO. When the Russian helicopters arrived, they were met with a storm of fire. Even though Russian forces eventually captured the airport, the victory was hollow. The airstrip was destroyed, the vital air tunnel never materialized, and Putin's envisioned 3-day war instantly transformed into a grinding siege of Kyiv, a siege that Russia would decisively lose within 5 weeks. This pattern of exploiting Russian predictability would repeat throughout the war, but never more spectacularly than in the autumn of 2022. By the summer of 2022, Russia had captured the strategic city of Izium, establishing it as a major forward operating base for approximately 18,000 troops. The city was a critical logistics hub, with railway lines running from Russia to Kupiansk and then into Izium, allowing for the efficient supply of the entire northern front. Yet, Ukrainian General Oleksandr Syrskyi was quietly preparing a masterpiece of military deception. Throughout July and August, Ukrainian and Russian media alike were saturated with talk of a major Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson Oblast in the south. On August 29, Ukraine officially announced the long-anticipated Kherson offensive had begun. Russia took the bait, frantically redeploying its best units southward, which reduced its forces in the Izium sector by at least half. It was all a brilliant ruse. On September 6, Ukrainian forces launched their real offensive in Kharkiv Oblast, achieving total surprise. The advance was breathtaking in its speed and ferocity. Ukrainian troops moved at an average of 4.6 miles per day, making it the fastest offensive operation in over a century of warfare. Within just 6 days, Ukraine had recaptured over 150 square miles of territory, liberated dozens of towns, and retaken the strategic cities of Izium and Kupiansk. Russian forces were in a state of panic and disarray. fleeing and abandoning vast stockpiles of ammunition, tanks, artillery, and even newly deployed equipment. Some Russian units were completely erased, marking the first time since World War Roman II that entire Russian formations had vanished in a single battle. While this military disaster unfolded, Russian citizens in Moscow were partying to celebrate the city's 875th anniversary, utterly disconnected from the catastrophic reality on the battlefield. If the Kharkiv counteroffensive proved Ukraine could win decisively on defense, the August 2024 Kursk incursion demonstrated something even more audacious. Ukraine could successfully invade Russia itself. The operation was bold to the point of recklessness, diverting precious forces from defensive positions to launch a cross-border attack. The result was the capture of roughly 480 square miles of Russian territory in Kursk Oblast, more territory, for reference, than Russia had managed to capture in all of 2024 up to that point. The strategic brilliance was multi-layered. First, it shattered the pervasive myth that Russian territory was invulnerable. Second, it forced Russia to divert approximately 50,000 troops away from other critical fronts, staggering Russian offensive plans by weeks or even months. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it demolished Western hesitation about providing Ukraine with advanced long-range weapons. For months prior, NATO had been reluctant to permit Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory with Western supplied arms, citing Russian nuclear threats as the primary reason. But when Ukraine invaded Russia using its own forces and Putin did not respond with nuclear weapons, the entire strategic calculation changed. Within months, F-16s, Mirage 2000s, and advanced missile systems were flowing into Ukraine, all with explicit permission to strike targets inside Russia. The Kursk incursion remained contested for well over half a year, with Ukrainian forces still controlling portions of the territory as late as June 2025. Russia's desperation became so profound that it allegedly employed North Korean troops to reinforce its counteroffensive, a move that only highlighted its own military shortcomings as these troops proved laughably incompetent. Perhaps Ukraine's most transformative innovation, born from sheer necessity, has been its revolution in drone warfare. In 2022, Ukraine's domestic defense industry was worth around $1 billion. By 2025, it had exploded to a $35 billion capacity, with Ukraine now producing roughly 1/3 of all weapons and ammunition used by its armed forces. In critical areas like drone production, that figure reaches nearly 100%. The results of this desperate innovation speak for themselves. By early 2025, drones accounted for approximately 70% of all Russian battlefield casualties, and in some engagements, that figure reached as high as 80%. Ukraine has developed a vast arsenal, from small, cheap FPV drones that can destroy million-dollar tanks to naval drones that forced Russia's Black Sea Fleet to abandon its base in Crimea, to long-range drones capable of striking targets hundreds of miles deep into Russian territory. The crown jewel of this drone campaign was Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, where Ukraine simultaneously struck 5 Russian airbases, damaging or destroying roughly 1/3 of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. These were precision attacks deep inside Russia's heartland, delivering the unequivocal message that nowhere in Russia was safe. The attacks were executed using modified FPV drones, enhanced through mobile networks to provide real-time video and manual control over vast distances, while their control signals were hidden within civilian data traffic, making them exceptionally difficult to detect and disrupt. This drone revolution was not solely reliant on Western donations. While systems like the U.S. Phoenix Ghost and Switchblade provided critical early capabilities, Ukraine built upon them through a domestic, distributed network of over 900 suppliers, ranging from major corporations to small garage workshops. When one workshop discovers an improvement, that information is spread across the entire network within days via platforms like the Brave One coordination system. This decentralized, agile innovation cycle moves at a speed that traditional, rigid military, industrial complexes cannot hope to match. Still, these innovations would have been impossible without the crucial lifeline of Western support, which bought Ukraine the time it needed to develop its own capabilities. The weapons that arrived from NATO were game changers. When the first HIMARS systems arrived in June 2022, they could deliver 200-pound guided warheads with pinpoint accuracy anywhere within 50 miles. This was a quantum leap from the Soviet-era artillery Ukraine was initially using, which took minutes to set up and had half the range. The roughly 40 HIMARS launchers provided by the U.S. were used to devastating effect, striking more than 350 Russian command posts, ammunition dumps, and supply depots. Each successful strike had a multiplier effect, as destroying a single ammunition depot could cripple Russian artillery fire across an entire sector for weeks. When Putin unleashed his supposedly invincible Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, Ukrainian Patriot batteries calmly shot them down. By November 2024, a Patriot battery in Kyiv intercepted a salvo of these missiles, a feat that would have been impossible with domestic equipment alone. Ukraine received 7 Patriot batteries, and while each interceptor missile costs millions, they have proven essential for protecting cities and infrastructure. The arrival of the first F-16s in August 2024 gave Ukraine its first real opportunity to contest the skies. These aircraft, though on their way to becoming museum pieces in some NATO countries, were still modern fighters equipped with advanced defensive systems. After a mid-life overhaul, they provided Ukraine with a credible aerial presence, and Ukrainian pilots adapted with remarkable speed. However, one brutal reality remains clear for Ukraine. It cannot win a war of attrition based on manpower alone. The nation's resilience is captured in the sentiment of one Ukrainian commander who stated, "We've been at war with the Russians for 300 years. We can hold on for a while longer." But holding on requires more than determination. It requires systematic adaptation to minimize casualties while maximizing the cost Russia pays for every inch of ground. Ukrainian commanders have implemented measures that, while seemingly rudimentary, are not systematically used by Russian forces. Better rotation plans to prevent burnout, more careful use of artillery to avoid counter-battery fire, precise troop movements guided by constant drone reconnaissance, and mobile command posts that can be evacuated instantly. This has led to a paradoxical scenario where Ukraine often has fewer troops visible on the front lines. Russian drones end up chasing isolated individuals, a poor return on a significant technological investment. Ukraine has also become a pioneer in ground drone technology, employing remotely driven robots on wheels, tracks, or even legs for resupply and evacuation. These ground drones fill a critical niche, operating in an environment where the skies are dominated by FPV drones and any human movement is perilous. This combination of drone warfare, meticulous tactical planning, and Western precision weapons has fundamentally altered the battlefield. Ukraine cannot match Russia's ability to throw waves of soldiers into the fight, but it can make every Russian advance so prohibitively costly in equipment, ammunition, and lives that Russia's numerical advantages become meaningless. The data unequivocally proves this strategy is working. By early 2025, Russian territorial gains had plummeted. Russia seized just 78 square miles in March 2025, down from 165 in January. Even more telling, Russia needed over 35 assaults per square kilometer captured in March, a five-fold increase from just 7.1 in November 2024. Essentially, Russia now has to perform 5 times as many offensive operations to gain the same minuscule amount of territory. While Ukraine adapts and innovates, Russia is hemorrhaging. According to Western intelligence agencies, Russia has already lost more than half of its available military hardware. Open-source intelligence groups have documented close to 23,000 units of Russian military equipment destroyed, damaged, or captured. These are not losses Russia can easily replace. About half of Russia's lost equipment comes from finite Soviet-era stockpiles, which are depleting at an alarming rate. Russia started the war with roughly 12,000 tanks and is now pulling progressively older and more obsolete equipment from storage. After starting with T-72s and T-80s, it moved to T-62s by mid-2022, with late 2024 even seeing T-34 tanks from World War II appear on transports for propaganda purposes. Analysts warn that Russia's repairable equipment reserves could be exhausted within 12-18 months unless production increases dramatically, which it cannot. Russia can only produce about 250 T-90M tanks and 460 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles per year, a fraction of its staggering loss rate. Simultaneously, Russia is hemorrhaging money. Its oil and gas revenues, which historically accounted for up to half of government income, dropped by as much as 35% year-over-year by May 2025. This is occurring while defense spending consumes a staggering 40% of the entire federal budget. Putin has been forced to announce that military spending will be significantly reduced for 2026. An admission that Russia cannot sustain the current financial tempo. The reasons for this economic pressure are clear. Ukraine's systematic drone strikes on Russian oil refineries have crippled roughly 17% of its refining capacity. The European Union's price cap has driven down the price of Russian crude, and with the EU planning to eliminate Russian imports entirely by 2027, Russia is losing its primary market. Turning to China and India has come at a devastating cost, with China demanding discounts of up to 40%. The human cost is even more catastrophic. Russia has suffered over 1 million casualties since the war began. Worse yet, its daily casualty rate has skyrocketed from 300 soldiers per day at the war's start to over 1,300 by March of 2025. At this rate, Russia could suffer another 440 casualties annually. Replacing these losses is becoming impossible. Enlistment rates have collapsed, and Russia has almost exhausted its supply of prisoner recruits. The demographic impact is severe, with the military now representing 3% of the country's labor force, systematically removing work-age men from the economy and exacerbating a pre-existing demographic crisis. Russia's geopolitical standing has crumbled alongside its military and economy. Its military exports, once a major source of revenue and influence, have collapsed by an estimated 92% between 2021 and 2024. Its relationships with allies are increasingly transactional and one-sided. China extracts economic concessions while using Russia as a cautionary tale. North Korea sends defective ammunition and ill-trained conscripts. Iran provides drones at a high markup. Meanwhile, NATO has emerged stronger than ever. Sweden and Finland have joined, further isolating Russia in the Baltic. Germany has committed to spending 5% of its GDP on defense, strengthening the alliance's collective security. Forbes calculated that at Russia's April 2025 rate of progress, capturing a mere 68 square miles of Ukrainian territory per month that would take approximately 230 years to occupy all of Ukraine. At the current casualty rate, that would require roughly 100 million Russian casualties, an impossible figure representing 70% of its current population. Obviously, the war will not last 2 centuries. Something has to give, and all evidence suggests it will be Russia's military capacity long before Ukraine's will to fight breaks. What makes Ukraine's performance so remarkable is the scale of what it has achieved without NATO's most advanced systems. The F-16s were surplus aircraft. There are no F-22s or F-35s. The missile batteries are from existing stocks, yet these surplus weapons, combined with Ukrainian ingenuity, courage, and tactical brilliance, have brought a supposed superpower to its knees. The lessons are clear for modern warfare. Decentralized innovation beats centralized control. Information and deception are as potent as firepower. Technology amplifies competence but does not create it, and speed of decision-making is paramount. Ukraine began this war fighting for its very survival, desperate to avoid a repeat of 2014. But at some point it transformed. It is no longer just holding on. Ukraine has become a military power that is systematically dismantling a supposedly superior enemy. Every month the war continues, Russia's position weakens irreversibly. It controls only about 18% of Ukrainian territory, much of it in ruins, at a cost of over 1,000 casualties per day. This brings Russia no closer to its strategic objectives, while Ukraine grows stronger. Its industry expands, its tactics evolve, and its soldiers become some of the most experienced in the world. Putin started this war believing he could recreate an empire in 3 days. Instead, he has presided over the greatest military humiliation Russia has suffered since World War II. The special military operation has become an existential threat to Russia itself, not from Ukrainian conquest, but from the systemic collapse of its military power, economic stability, and global standing. Ukraine didn't just outplay Putin. It is making him pay for that miscalculation with everything Russia has, and the cost continues to mount with every passing day.